She wasn't crying, she was holding a note. It was just past noon in Buffalo, New York, the kind of winter light that makes everything look washed out and farther away than it really is. On the edge of an empty warehouse parking lot, in the wind that came straight off the water, a tiny German Shepherd puppy sat hunched over a crumpled piece of paper. Her whole body shook, but she didn't move away. She had one paw pressed over the note, as if the only thing keeping it from blowing into the street was her decision not to let go. The thin blue rubber band dug into the paper, cutting a faint line across it, fluttering every time she exhaled. Her breath came out in small white clouds, too quick, too shallow. The concrete around her was bare and wide, no food, no bowl, no blanket, no car, just one dark smear where the snow had melted from the heat of her body. You could have driven past and never seen her. You could have looked straight at this abandoned puppy and still missed that her whole world was trapped under that paw. The wind picked up and pushed at her fur, revealing how thin she really was. One ear drooped, the other curved just enough at the tip to look inked in black, like someone had dipped it in a bottle and thought better of finishing the job. Her eyes didn't search for anyone. They just stared past the rows of gray loading docks, somewhere between here and nowhere. I stepped closer, and she flinched, but she didn't run. She tightened her toes around the paper instead, the way someone might grip a handrail in the dark. For a second, we just breathed the same cold air, both of us listening to the rasp of her tiny lungs. I crouched slowly, boots scraping the concrete, trying not to scare her more than the day already had. Up close, I could see how carefully she protected the note, how her claws curved just enough to pin the edge without tearing it. The blue rubber band trembled like a nerve. I reached my hand out, not for her, but for the paper she was guarding. And as my fingers brushed the edge, I saw it, the faint outline of a tiny paw pressed into a blurred, ink-dark stain that looked exactly like someone had tried to cry on the page and run out of tears halfway through. I was afraid to unfold her secret. My fingers held the edge of the paper, and for a moment I just stayed there, still crouched on that cold concrete beside her. She watched every tiny movement, chest fluttering, paw pressing down a little harder as if to ask whether I was sure. This little stray puppy wasn't guarding food or a toy. She was guarding one last explanation. I slid my hand under her paw, slow enough that she could pull back if she wanted. She didn't. She just let out a thin breath, something between a sigh and a shiver, and loosened her toes. The blue rubber band stuck for a second to her fur, before snapping free and falling against my thumb. I opened the paper carefully, like noise alone might hurt her. The creases were deep, the corners softened by too many folds. Ink had run in places, bleeding into the fibers, blurring letters until they looked like someone had written them with wet hands. The writing was uneven, like whoever held the pen couldn't stop shaking. I read it once in my head before I let the words out. She is gentle. Please keep her warm. Please don't scold her. She follows the paper. I swallowed hard, listening to the wind scrape along the loading docks, while this rescued puppy stared up at me, like the whole note was an apology she couldn't take back. Someone hadn't just left her. Someone had written instructions for how to love what they were walking away from. I looked down again and saw them just below the last crooked line. Tiny smudges where her paw had stepped on the page before the ink dried, little blurred ovals pressed into the corner like a clumsy signature. It was as if they wanted the note to belong to her, not to them. She shifted closer, nose brushing the back of my hand, eyes fixed on the paper, not on me. I could feel the question sitting there between us, trembling as much as her body. Was she more afraid of people or of the moment when this paper wasn't in her sight anymore? I let the note rest on my open palm and lowered it toward her again. Her paw lifted, hovered, then settled gently over the edge, pulling it back with surprising care. The puppy slides the paper against my fingers again, like she's afraid that without it, no one will see her at all. The ink was what whispered her name. I stayed there in that parking lot cold, letting the wind do most of the talking for a while. She still had the page anchored under her paw, eyes locked on it, like everything that mattered was written there and not in the empty space around us. I realized I was holding my breath to match her shallow little breaths, this timid puppy trying so hard not to disappear. "My name's Harlan," I said, quiet, more to fill the air than to introduce myself. She didn't flinch at the sound. Her ears twitched once, then settled, as if she'd decided my voice wasn't the worst thing this day had thrown at her. I turned my hand, palm open, not reaching, just waiting. She watched it for a long second, then lifted her paw, slow and unsure. The paper scraped softly over the concrete as she nudged it toward me, then set it down exactly in the center of my hand, like this little orphaned pup was trusting me with the only proof she had that someone once cared enough to write. I folded the top edge back along the crease, and that's when I noticed it. Where the ink had bled into the fibers, dark strokes overlapped in one tight corner, forming something that looked less like an accident and more like a word trying to surface. Q-U, the tail of an L curling through the stain. Quill, I breathed, barely louder than the wind. Her eyes snapped up at the sound, not wide, not panicked, just focused, like the world had briefly lined up with something inside her. I said it again, softer this time, tasting it the way the ink had soaked into the page. Quill. The tip of her tail moved just once, a tiny, uncertain flick. She eased her paw back onto the edge of the paper as if to say, "Fine, that can be mine, but don't take it away yet." I let the note rest there between us, her new name pressed into the same stain that had almost erased the letters. Then Quill tried to stand. She pushed up on shaky legs, got halfway, and her body folded on itself, slow and helpless, like a letter collapsing back along its old, tired creases. We treated her with silence and warmth, not urgency. I wrapped her in the softest blanket I had in the truck, lifting her slowly so she wouldn't startle, the way you'd hold something breakable that still wanted to pretend it wasn't. Her body felt cooler than the air outside, the kind of deep cold that sinks into a cold puppy and doesn't let go easily. I settled her on the passenger seat, turned the heater up just enough to breathe life back into the space, and slid a small heating pad under the blanket near her belly. The note stayed beside her, right where she could see it if she opened her eyes. I didn't dare move it farther. Even half-conscious, she kept glancing toward that scrap of paper like it was the last familiar landmark in a world she hadn't chosen. Her breathing was still shallow, more whisper than breath, the kind of sound you lean in close to catch because you're afraid the next one won't come. I rested my hand near her cheek, not touching her, just letting her decide what she needed. And she did. Quill nudged forward the smallest inch, pressing her nose into my palm as if she'd been waiting for a place to rest her fear. I felt her pulse through that thin patch of fur, soft and uneven, but there. The heater hummed low, filling the cab with slow, steady warmth, like the truck was exhaling for both of us. Her eyelids flickered, her tiny ribs lifting under the blanket with a fragile rhythm that made me count along without even realizing it. One lift, one fall. A pause that lasted exactly one heartbeat longer than I wanted. This healing puppy wasn't fighting with force. She was fighting by holding on. Snow tapped against the windshield in small bursts, not enough to distract her, just enough to remind me how cold the world was outside this little pocket of borrowed heat. I kept my other hand near the note, making sure the paper didn't slide out of view. Some dogs cling to toys or shirts or the smell of a home they used to know. Quill clung to a message someone had written with shaking hands. When the worst of her shivering eased, I took the small digital thermometer from my glove box and slipped it gently beneath the blanket, careful not to wake her. For a moment, the screen stayed blank, as if deciding whether it wanted to tell me the truth at all. Then the numbers appeared, and they hovered on that thin, dangerous line between too late and we still have time. She would only eat if the note was close. By the time we got to the clinic, the worst of the shaking had faded, but Quill was still more quiet than anything else. We moved slowly, no rushing, no clatter, just careful hands and soft voices that barely rose above her breathing. On the metal exam table, she looked even smaller, a little bundle of blanket and ribs and worry. The vet checked her over with the kind of focus I've seen 1,000 times but never stopped being grateful for. Mild frostbite on the edges of her ears, pads sore and reddened, skin dry, gums pale. Dehydrated, underfed, but no broken bones, no bleeding inside, no hidden impact waiting to surprise us later. For a stray puppy that had been sitting in the wind with her life under her paw, it was almost a miracle. We set her up in a quiet corner run, away from the louder dogs and the banging doors, a soft towel, a shallow bowl of warm food, another of water, and beside the bowl, slipped into a clear plastic sleeve, we laid the note where she could see it without straining. At first, she just watched, head low, ears tilted, eyes moving from the paper to the food and back again, as if she couldn't quite believe all three could exist in the same place. Then slowly, Quill stretched her neck forward and sniffed the edge of the sleeve, fogging it with a tiny breath. She took one bite, stopped, glanced at the words trapped under the plastic, at that ink-dark stain shaped like her own paw. Then she took another bite, and another, each one small, like she was afraid the bowl might vanish if she moved too fast. This recovering puppy was eating on her own, but only as long as that scrap of history stayed in her line of sight. I sat on the floor just outside the run, knees complaining, back against the wall, letting her decide how much she needed me there. Every time her gaze drifted toward the note, mine did too. The paper was drying now, the last of the dampness lifting out of the fibers, the wrinkles settling into place. When the light from the high window shifted and struck the page just right, I saw it change. As the last moisture left the paper, another faint word slowly surfaced in the blur of ink, like it had been hiding there, waiting for a second chance to be read. 2 taps, and she lifted her head. The new word had appeared so faint I almost thought I imagined it. I leaned closer to the plastic sleeve, tilting it toward the light, and realized it wasn't on the front at all. Whoever wrote that note had turned the page over and added something quick, like an afterthought they couldn't leave out. On the back, near the bottom edge, in smaller, tighter letters, were 3 words. 2 taps equals safe. No explanation, no name. Just a code, left behind for a dog who couldn't read but somehow understood the world better than the person holding the pen. Quill had finished eating and curled herself into the corner of the run, nose tucked near her paws, eyes half open, watching without really resting. That anxious puppy had learned that silence and stillness were safer than asking for anything. I slid the sleeve back to where she could see it and let my knuckles rest lightly against the plastic door. Then I did it. 2 soft taps, nothing loud, nothing sharp, just a quiet rhythm against the door like a secret someone had trusted us with. Her ears twitched first, then her head came up, slow and cautious. She looked at the note, then at my hand, as if she were trying to line up what she remembered with what she was hearing now. After a moment, she reached out and answered with the tip of her paw, one gentle touch, then a second, barely making any sound at all. That gentle pup had just agreed to the smallest kind of truce. I let myself breathe, just once, a little deeper, and as I adjusted the sleeve to keep it from sliding, the corner of the paper caught, tore the tiniest bit, and Quill froze, eyes locked on that rip like her heart had just split in the same place. We weren't just treating her pain. We were trying to keep its meaning from falling apart. After that tiny rip, Quill wouldn't take her eyes off the corner of the page. Her body stayed still, but everything in her gaze was pulled tight toward that torn edge, like she was waiting for the rest of it to disappear too. This fragile puppy had already lost enough pieces of her life out there on that cold concrete. So we changed the plan. No more bare paper, no more risk of it crumbling every time someone breathed too close. I slid the note out of the old sleeve and into a fresh, clear sheet, the kind we use to protect medical charts. No machines, no noisy laminator, just a thin layer and a soft press of my hands to smooth it flat. I did it right there on the floor outside her run where she could see every move. Her nose pressed against the bars, following the motion of the page like it was a living thing. I could feel her watching my fingers trace the lines, careful not to smudge, careful not to fold. The ink, the paw print, the words 2 taps equals safe, all of it sealed away from time and clumsy thumbs. When I slid the newly protected note back toward her, she stepped forward without being asked. Quill sniffed along the plastic, then bumped it with her nose, a small, decisive tap. Her tail gave the slightest hesitant thud against the towel, just once, like she wasn't ready for joy, but she was willing to rehearse it. For the first time, that brave pup reached past the paper and brushed her nose against my sleeve, too, as if to say we were now both responsible for this story. We dimmed the lights for the night, leaving only the soft glow over the runs. The clinic grew quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every breath sound louder than it is. Quill curled up with her side toward the note, close enough to see it without straining, close enough to dream with it in view. Around midnight, I came back to check on her. Her chest was rising, but the pattern had changed. Her breathing had turned uneven, catching and stuttering in her ribs like a page someone had tried to smooth out and only wrinkled more. Sometimes the loudest thing in the room is the silence of a monitor. By dawn, her breathing had worn itself thin, each inhale catching like fabric on a nail. We moved her to the oxygen box, not with sirens or shouting, just with careful hands and that tight, quiet urgency that lives in the back of your throat. Clear walls, soft bedding, warm air, and the laminated note taped at her eye level, words and paw print facing in toward her. Quill lay on her side at first, ribs working a little too hard, nostrils flaring as the richer air flowed around her. The world outside the box went muffled, like someone had put a palm over the whole night. I could still hear other dogs shifting in their runs, the hum of machines, but everything narrowed down to one injured puppy and the slow rise of her chest. I sat on the stool beside the box and rested 2 fingers against the plastic. 2 taps, soft, measured, the way the note told us to. Her ear flicked toward the sound, that one dark-tipped edge catching the light, and after a breath, she lifted her paw and brushed it against the blanket. Once. Twice. Our little survivor pup was answering from inside her clear, humming bubble. The monitor above us traced out her heartbeat and oxygen, a thin green line with numbers that felt more personal than any name. No alarms, no dramatic spikes, just a slow, stubborn struggle plotted in pixels. I watched her eyes blink, slow and sticky with exhaustion, watched her nose press against the inside wall, fogging a small circle beneath the taped note. She wasn't fighting with noise. She was fighting by staying. Every few minutes, I'd tap again, and every time, if she was awake, she'd respond with that soft press of her paw into the bedding, her whole effort focused into that tiny movement. The numbers on the screen wavered and dipped, sliding lower than I liked, each drop a cold finger down my spine. They kept falling, one by one, until they reached the edge of where we knew she could safely hold on. And then, right there on that narrow ledge, they hesitated and stopped. At dawn, she pressed her note against the glass. The sky outside the narrow clinic window had gone soft and pink, the kind of color that makes everything inside feel a little less sharp. I must have dozed in the chair because the next thing I knew, the oxygen box was quiet and Quill was awake, eyes clearer than they'd been in days. This little German Shepherd puppy had dragged herself closer to the front, the laminated page pushed up beneath her paws. She nudged the edge of it until the plastic met the inside of the glass, lining the words up with her own reflection. From where I sat, all I could see was that tiny paw print and the smudge of ink pressed against the wall of the box, as if she were saying, "I'm still here. I'm still trying." I lifted my hand and gave the glass 2 gentle taps. The sound was barely more than a whisper, but her ear caught it immediately. She blinked once, then answered with her paw, pressing it into the blanket. 1 tap, then a second. The rhythm felt steadier this time, less like a question, more like a promise trying to form. Her breathing had changed too. Still shallow, still careful, but no longer scraping the bottom of what her lungs could manage. The monitor above us held its numbers like it finally believed in them. In that quiet, surrounded by wires and plastic and the faint hiss of oxygen, she looked more like a hopeful pup than a fading one. Out at the front desk, they were starting a list, a simple sheet for people asking about her future once she was strong enough. Names, phone numbers, little notes in the margin. The line for ready for adoption stayed blank for now, because the real question wasn't whether the list was open. It was whether Quill was ready to loosen her paw from that note and let a whole new life take its place. She puts the note in my hand, and then she walks by herself. It happens on an ordinary morning, which is how the best miracles sneak up on you. The oxygen box is gone now, replaced by a regular run with a low door and a strip of sunlight that slides across the floor as the day moves. Quill is sitting right where that light begins, her nose resting on the edge of the laminated page. For a long time, that resilient puppy wouldn't stand if anyone was watching too closely. She'd shift, brace, think about it, and then sink back down, like the memory of falling was heavier than her own body. But this time is different. This time she looks from the note to me and holds my gaze just long enough to make a decision. Slowly, she grips the edge of the plastic between her teeth and pushes herself up. No one is holding her. No one is lifting. Her legs tremble, straighten, then lock into place. She takes one step forward, then another, the note hanging awkwardly from her mouth, but she refuses to let it go. I kneel by the open run door, hands steady, heart anything but. She closes the distance in those small, unsteady strides until her nose bumps against my fingers. Gently, she deposits the page into my palm like it's something valuable she's returning to its owner. A loyal pup handing over the only story she's ever had. I curl my hand around the note, feeling the faint ridges of the dried ink through the plastic. Then I do what we've done from the beginning, 2 soft taps on the floor beside the doorway. After that, I lean back, giving her space, giving her the choice. Quill looks at the light strips stretching out into the hallway, then back at my hand, now empty. Her ears tilt forward, uncertain but curious, and then she moves. 1 step, 2, 3 solid, careful steps straight through the doorway, her paws landing in the patch of daylight like she's stepping into a world that might finally be hers. Behind me, on the counter, sit the adoption forms with her temporary ID clipped to the top. In front of me, Quill's eyes lift to mine with a question only she can answer about what comes next. She doesn't have to shout anymore. We talk in whispers now. In the little foster house back in Buffalo, the note hangs in a simple frame on the wall, low enough that Quill can see it without stretching. It's not hidden away in a drawer, not folded, not forgotten. It's right there by the hallway, where the light from the window catches the paw print and those shaky words every morning. On the first night, she kept pacing under it, glancing up, then back at me, then up again. So I took it down, held it out, and let her decide. This adopted puppy pressed her nose against the glass, breathed a small fog over the ink, and then took the frame gently in her teeth. She carried it 3 slow steps to the bedroom door, set it down, and lay beside it like a guard. Now, when something startles her, a dropped pan, a car door, a laugh that comes out too loud, she goes to get the frame. She brings it to where I'm standing, sets it down with care, and waits. I answer the same way every time. 2 quiet taps on the wooden cabinet or the side of the doorway. Safe, still safe. Her world is wider now. There's a soft blanket under the front window where she likes to fold herself into the sun, eyes half closed, ears still listening. Her new tag brushes her chest with a light jingle when she shifts, like a tiny bell reminding the room she's claimed her place in it. When she dreams, her paws twitch, but they don't scrabble like they used to. There's more running now than running away in whatever she sees behind those eyelids. We still visit the shelter, but we don't walk through the back anymore. We come in the front door like guests. She trots beside me, tail easy, sniffing every corner as if she's checking that the other dogs know someone made it out. The staff lean over the counter to say her name, and she leans back into their hands without flinching. Sometimes, when the house is too quiet, I'll tap twice on the hallway wall just to see what happens. From the next room, I hear it. The soft thump of her tail hitting plaster twice in perfect time with me. And in that echo, I finally understand how this story is supposed to end. Sometimes it only takes saving 1 crumpled page to save an entire life. When I think about Quill now, I don't see the cold parking lot first. I see the way she carries her note like a small flag that somehow survived the storm. The world will always have people who walk away, who leave a rescue story puppy sitting in the wind with nothing but a scrap of paper and a heartbeat that isn't sure it's welcome. But it also has hands that lift and rooms that warm and patience that sits on the floor outside a kennel until a tiny paw decides to trust again. Cruelty feels like winter. Hope feels like someone leaving the heater on a little too high, just in case, and coming back at midnight to count breaths they're afraid to lose. This little guy's journey from abandonment to rehabilitation shows how important nonprofit rescue groups really are. Not in a slogan way, but in the way a dog's eyes change when they finally understand they're not temporary anymore. People sometimes ask what it takes to help. Money matters. Time matters. But so does something as simple as pressing share on a story like hers. Every time you send this to another pair of eyes, you widen the circle of people who might notice the next handwritten note, the next frightened face, the next dog waiting behind a dumpster or at the edge of a road. Caring for a rescued puppy is more than love. It's responsibility. It's pet care. It's showing up when no one is watching and choosing kindness anyway. Somewhere out there right now, another dog is holding on to their own version of a battered page, invisible until someone decides to look closer. If you listen and feel two soft taps somewhere in your chest while you watch this, that's just Quill saying thank you for seeing her. Join our Brave Paws family. Be their voice. Be their hope.